Okay, I want to start by having you guys kind of imagine if with me, okay? So, everybody think of somebody that you've known for a really long time, shared a lot of life with, you know them well, they know you well. Maybe it's a spouse, a sibling, a close friend. Get somebody pictured in your mind. And now imagine that that person comes to you one day and they announce that they need to unburden themselves of a secret. They have supernatural powers. And they confess that they have actually existed since the beginning of time. And they have a direct line of communication with God Himself that allows them to heal people with a word or a touch. And at this point, you're probably like looking around, like, am I being punked? Like, where's the punchline here? What's going on? But they double down and they say, actually, you need to know that I'm the key to righting all the wrongs in the world. How would you even respond in that situation? Like, what would you say? What would you do? I know if it were Craig or my best friend Meredith that came to me and they started talking like that, I would be calling 911 and seeking professional psychiatric help immediately, you know? But this is essentially the situation that Jesus' real life friends and family found themselves in 2,000 years ago. You just know that his younger siblings must have gathered together for a family meeting at one point to discuss, like, is our older brother losing his mind? Like, what is going on here? Most of us grew up in the Bible Belt where we were so enmeshed in church culture. I know this is true for me anyway, that we just accepted the divine nature of Jesus as common knowledge. Like, of course, Jesus is God. But when I step back and I imagine myself watching someone in my real life make the kinds of claims that Jesus made, it's easier for me to see why this is actually something that really trips up a lot of people that are new to Christianity. These are kinds of questions that they sometimes have and are afraid to ask out loud, right? Was Jesus who he really claimed to be, or was he actually insane? Last week, Jeremiah quoted a section of the book Mere Christianity. It's one of my favorite books by C.S. Lewis, and it sets up one of his most famous theological arguments. The idea that it doesn't make sense to believe that Jesus was just a good moral teacher. The guy literally claimed to be the Son of God himself. We can't just say that he was a nice guy who had a gift for down-to-earth teaching. You have to conclude that he was one of three things. He was either a really skillful liar, he was a lunatic, or he is who he says he is, and he was Lord. We've been in this What is Truth series since the very beginning of summer, and all throughout the series, we've been taking a look at the hard things that cause many people to question whether Christianity is true. Some people have walked away from the faith because of questions like this. This is one of the questions that many people have wrestled with since Jesus came on the scene. And much has already been said in this series about why we believe that we can trust that Jesus was definitely not a liar, and why we believe that he was indeed who he claimed to be, that he is Lord. But we've never really unpacked that third option, right? So today we're going to do that. We're going to take a hard look at a question many people have asked over the years. Was Jesus crazy? So cards on the table, probably no surprise here. We have good reason to believe that far from Jesus being insane, he was actually the most sane person who ever walked the earth, which is really good news for the rest of us, right? Because as the only fully sane human who ever lived, only Jesus can save us from our insanity. And when the world around us or within us feels crazy, Jesus invites us to come and learn from him the unforced rhythms of life in his kingdom. Before we go any further, I just want to have a quick PSA and clarify something. I'm using words like lunatic, crazy, insane here. And in our culture, unfortunately, those words get thrown around a lot in flippant ways that have a tendency to stigmatize people who suffer from legitimate mental illness. And I would imagine most of us have seen the very real, very heartbreaking impact of mental illness on someone in our lives. Either we may have experienced it ourselves or someone we love has. And when you watch the effect that that can have on someone, you know that there is nothing flippant or funny about that at all. So we take mental health really seriously around here. We actually did a whole series on it last year that's available to rewatch on the app. And we have a whole bank of mental health resources, including some counselor recommendations and other guides available on the website and on our app. So if you or someone you love is struggling in this way, I really want to encourage you, come talk to one of the pastors after the gathering. take a look at some of those resources. And please keep in mind that as we get ready to talk about very real psychiatric conditions over the next few minutes, our goal as Christ followers is always going to be to help people who are struggling in this way, not to be flippant about things in a way that causes further harm or isolation. Okay, so that's my soapbox for this morning. I just wanted to say that out of the gate. So back to the question at hand. Was Jesus insane? Is this a fair question to ask? If your spouse or your friend, the person you were picturing, came to you today and they made the kind of claims that Jesus did, that they were the Son of God, that they could heal people, that they had power over even death, mental health practitioners would categorize this as delusional psychosis. That would be the first place they would go. So what we're going to do at the beginning today is just take a look at some of the psychiatric disorders that some people have claimed that maybe Jesus could have suffered from, and whether that diagnosis makes sense based on what we know of his life throughout the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So the first that gets named when people ask this question, was Jesus actually crazy, is schizophrenia. Most of us have heard of this. Schizophrenia is a disorder that's characterized by pervasive delusions and hallucinations. These people suffering with schizophrenia see, hear, believe things that are not real. And people have questioned at times, maybe that was what was going on. Maybe Jesus was having delusions and hallucinations when he claimed to be God or to hear God's voice or to know things about people that he couldn't have otherwise known. Like the time that he met the woman at the well and he tells her all about her life, right? But those things can only be delusions if they're not true, right? We can't prove empirically that Jesus could hear or see God. That's an area we just have to have faith. But the instance of the woman at the well is a really good example because she went around after that encounter and told everybody in town about this man who knew things about her life that nobody else possibly could have known. So we have real evidence that this was not a delusion. When we look at some of the other characteristic symptoms of schizophrenia, there's things like disorganized speech or inappropriate behavior, and specifically at a level that ends up isolating and alienating other people. When we look at Jesus's life, neither of these hold water for him. He was an excellent communicator. Before the days where, he could go viral and people could put the word out on Facebook or whatever, he would have crowds numbering in the thousands coming to hear him teach. And he was far from isolated. The man voluntarily chose to travel all the time with a band of disciples, and he frequently was attending parties and big dinner gatherings. Jesus wasn't moving away from others. He wasn't alienating others. He was moving toward them. So we just don't see good evidence that schizophrenia is something that Jesus was probably struggling with. Other people have then said maybe Jesus was bipolar. Maybe he was struggling with bipolar disorder, which is a lot more common. Many of us may have seen the effects of this. Bipolar disorder is characterized by rapid, extreme swings between two poles, between depressive episodes and manic episodes. And in particular, when someone with bipolar disorder is manic, they can often experience hallucinations and delusions. So they say maybe this explains Jesus's claims that he was God. But this diagnosis really doesn't make sense either, because we really don't see anything in the gospel accounts that would suggest that he was also having depressive episodes. And often when this is brought up, people will say, well, they're not going to write down the stuff he did during depressive episodes. It would be the things that happened during manic episodes that would get written down. And that's fair. They are unlikely to have recorded periods of time where Jesus was isolated at home, struggling to eat or bathe. But there are other symptoms that we would expect to see if he were struggling with mania. For instance, people in a manic episode often really struggle to sleep, and they'll go days even without sleeping at all. And it's characterized by rapid, pressured speech, like their thoughts are getting way, way ahead of them, and they're just trying to keep up. But neither of these are evident in Jesus's life. Jesus was a guy who chose his words extremely carefully. He was a witty, insightful, very patient communicator. And even his critics often had to admit how impressed they were with the ways that he could make complex things simple and clear to his listeners. Plus, the guy was able to nap pretty much in any circumstance. We see all these evidences of Jesus just taking a nap in the middle of something, like on a boat in the middle of a storm. So he probably wasn't struggling with those moments of sleeplessness. All around, Jesus was someone who was a very non-anxious presence, both when he was on his own and when he was with others. And then the last potential diagnosis that sometimes gets mentioned is, what if Jesus was suffering from sociopathic personality disorder? Now, this is a psychiatric condition where the person has developed a pattern of getting their needs met by manipulating other people for their own gain. Sociopaths are often very charming, they're flattering, they become experts at lying to maintain a shiny exterior perception. An example of this would be, if you've ever seen the movie Catch Me If You Can, Frank Abagnale, the main character in that. That movie was based on a real story. Frank Abagnale, who even as a teenager was able to show up with such confidence that he was able to work his way into cockpits of planes and operating rooms and all sorts of other situations he wasn't authorized or trained to be in. So that's one of example of what that looks like. When we look at Jesus's life, we know he could be charming for sure. In fact, he was often considered kind of a life of the party personality type, and his critics used that against him to try to pin him as like being a drunkard or a glutton because he was at all these parties all of the time. But Jesus was not afraid to say hard things at the expense of his social position or his power. In fact, he was run out of town more than once for calling out the hypocrisy of the religious leaders of his day. And instead of playing the crowds to try to gain power and influence, he actively avoided those things when they tried to thrust them upon him. One example is after the feeding of the 5,000. So we all know the story, right? People are there listening to Jesus teach. Everybody's getting hungry, and they say, we don't have any food, but there's this one kid, he's got his lunch, he's willing to share, and Jesus blesses it, and everybody eats, and there's like baskets of leftovers at the end, right? After that, John tells us, when the people saw that he had done a miraculous sign, they said, this is truly the prophet who is coming into the world. Jesus understood that they were about to come and force him to be their king. So he took refuge again, alone on a mountain. If Jesus were someone struggling with sociopathic personality disorder, he would not have passed up an opportunity like that. Instead, Jesus said, this is not what I came to do. Jesus' life was not marked by trying to use other people, but by serving them. He was an unhurried, non-anxious presence. He was able to differentiate himself from power and prestige and people's opinion of him because he didn't need that kind of validation to keep himself centered in God's love and his purpose on earth. He was available to others, present to them, able to meet their needs without trying to force their hand to prove that he had power or influence. It just doesn't make sense that a guy who showed up like this over and over in interactions was suffering from psychosis. In fact, it sounds like he was probably about as sane as it gets. Which makes us ask the next question, like, what if we're the ones who are actually insane? What if it's us that are struggling? There's another more popular definition of insanity that we've probably all heard a million times. You can help me out with it. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? Yeah. So this type of insanity, I think we've all experienced. And it sounds a whole lot like a really familiar, all too relatable passage in Romans where Paul says, the desire to do good is inside of me, but I can't do it. I don't do the good that I want to do, but I do the evil that I don't want to do. And we've all experienced this, right? Throughout human history, we have done the same things over and over again, thinking, this time is the time, we're going to get it right. And over again, we repeat patterns individually, relationally, corporately, that lead to the same destructive end results. C.S. Lewis put it this way. He said, what Satan put into the heads of our remote ancestors was the idea that they could be like gods, could set up on their own as if they had created themselves, be their own masters, invent some sort of happiness for themselves outside God, apart from God. And out of that hopeless attempt has come nearly all that we call human history. Money, poverty, ambition, war, prostitution, classes, empires, slavery. The long, terrible story of man trying to find something other than God which will make him happy. And yet still, if you take a spin around social media this afternoon, you're going to see a sea of people trying to convince you that they have it figured out. And if you'll just listen to them and follow them and adopt their views and their practices, they've got the key that's going to give you the freedom and the peace and the happiness you're looking for. King Solomon said it this way: whatever has happened, that's what will happen again. Whatever has occurred, that's what will occur again. There's nothing new under the sun. We keep repeating the same destructive cycle over and over again and expecting different results, which is the definition of insanity, right? Brian talked about this at the end of September in a message about sin, salvation, and Savior, and he described this pattern like a virus that all of humanity has been infected with. That virus is sin, and it leads to self-destruction and death. But then he reminded us of the good news. He said, we experience salvation when we align our lives with the reality that out of God's great love, Jesus, our Savior, conquered sin and death so we can all fully live. Guys, Jesus wasn't crazy. He was the key. He was who he said he was. And as the only fully sane human who ever walked the earth, only Jesus can help us on our way out of that insane cycle. When the world around us or within us feels crazy, Jesus invites us to come to him and learn from him the unforced rhythms of life in his kingdom. So what does that look like? Like, how can Jesus save us from our insanity? I think the only antidote we have to this virus Brian talked about is for us to live a life that's modeled after the one person who managed to escape that vicious, crazy-making cycle, and that's Jesus. He lived in our world, he experienced the madness around us, and he saw the pain it caused. Matthew said that Jesus traveled among all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, announcing the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every sickness. Now, when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were troubled and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Matthew says that Jesus saw these people and his heart was breaking for how much pain and brokenness they were experiencing because they were repeating the same things over and over again, thinking it was going to get them to a different place. And he says, I have come to lead you out of that cycle. In John, he says, I am the good shepherd. I'm the one you were waiting for. I know my sheep and they know me, just as the Father knows me and I know the Father. I give up my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that don't belong to the sheep pen, and I must lead them too. They will listen to my voice, and there will be one flock with one shepherd. So what does it look like to let Jesus be that good shepherd in our lives? What does it look like to let him shepherd us out of it, what feels like insanity around us? I think the best way to talk about this is to rewind back to the most famous shepherd passage in the Bible, which is Psalm 23, where King David says, the Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. I love the pattern that we see in this, how the shepherd interacts with his sheep, because we have to start in this situation by just acknowledging the truth that we are with the good shepherd, right? Jesus is with us. He is our good shepherd. He's always with us. And because of that, we lack nothing and we don't have to be afraid of anything. And then once we start from that place of seeing that the shepherd is with us, the first thing he does is he makes them rest. He makes them get a good drink. He replenishes them and restores their souls. And then at the end of that, he guides them along right paths. In Meadow Heights lingo, this is the part where we talk about learning from Jesus, how to live and love like Jesus in our world. This is the whole basis of how we do church around here. It's why we never stop talking about these 10 practices for becoming, because this is what we do. We start by noticing God at work in and around us. We say, God, you are the good shepherd. We know you're here with us. And from that foundation, we allow him to restore us and then lead us on the path we need to go. This is also why we keep offering groups that have things like tools and support so you can apprentice yourself to Jesus alongside other people who are doing the same. Because as the only fully sane human who ever lived, it's Jesus we have to look to lead us out of the insanity of the world around us. And when that world feels crazy, whether the world around us or the world inside of us, Jesus is always there inviting us to come and learn from him the unforced rhythms of life in his kingdom. Most of us are living every day in the context of a world that feels like it's lost its mind. And when we're there, The only way to find peace and sanity is to fix our eyes on the only fully sane person to ever live. And then we learn from him. We practice living the way he did. And over time, as we do this, it doesn't happen instantly, but we apprentice ourselves to this good shepherd. We begin to experience the peace and the wholeness that he offers. And then we don't just experience it, we start to embody it. And then other people around us begin to feel that peace and that sanity. We become an unstoppable source of God's love and sanity that changes our world. And I just imagine if we began to really live that, if we begin to really allow our good shepherd to restore us, replenish us, and then guide us in the way that we live, what kind of unstoppable source of non-anxious, loving, sane presence could we be for the people around us? When we stop trying to get our own needs met through other people because they're already met through Jesus. How different would Facebook feel this week if we were all living this way? What if we woke up to the reality that we don't have to wait for heaven someday with God to experience peace and wholeness? Because Jesus is right there offering to teach us his ways that lead to peace and wholeness in this world, even amid the anxiety and the craziness. The impact that could have on our family and our friends and our neighbors, if we really embrace that good news, that Jesus is the only fully sane person to ever live, and that he offers to lead us out of that insanity as we learn from him the unforced rhythms of life in his kingdom. I will be honest with you guys, the world around me and within me has felt pretty crazy lately. I didn't know how I'd do this today. It's been a while. Most of you know my dad passed away last month. And that was a whole bucket of crazy on its own. So I've been dealing with a lot of the grief of that. It's hard to be up here and not see him in the corner. But along with that grief, I've also been dealing with some other grief that surfaced after the craziness of that. As I looked around and realized how angry and divisive the culture around me had become, and the ways that that's begun to impact people that I love deeply and their relationships, my heart started breaking for that. And fun times, I'm a woman in her early to mid 40s, which means my body decided this would be a really cool time of life to reshuffle my entire hormonal deck. So when I read the phrase, when the world within me feels crazy, yeah, this is where I'm at right now. It feels pretty crazy sometimes. But when I realize that my goal in life is to let God shepherd me toward a saner rhythm of life, I realize that I have to be intentional about turning down the things that make me focus on the insanity and turn up the volume on the things that help me focus on the good news of Jesus. And that means for me lately, just to be honest, I've had to be more aware of reality of how much the media I consume impacts my heart, my mind. I started to realize that I was always somebody who was affected by those things. And so I've always been pretty intentional and careful. But I started to notice that the more time I spent on social media, or the more time that I spent reading the news outside of just keeping myself informed at a basic level, the more I could feel anxiety creeping up, and the more things started to get crazy. And when I get to that place where those things get really loud in my head and in my heart, I tend to go one of two ways. Some of you may identify with this. Either I feel like just giving up and sinking into depression or fatalism. I just want to stick my head in the sand and not think about it. Or more often for me, I let anxiety take over. And I just go. I try to fix things. I try to be in control of everything. And what I realize is neither of those things feel all that much like the unforced rhythms of life in God's kingdom. And I know that's the kind of life I want to practice. That's the kind of person I want to become. And because of that, I just set some boundaries and say, okay, what are the quality and quantity of media that I can handle while focusing and centering my life on learning from Jesus how to live and love like he does. And so for me, I had to learn to parent myself pretty better. I had to set screen time limits on my phone. I blocked or limited news sites that tend to cause me extra anxiety. And recently we've even canceled a lot of our streaming services. I have been a Netflix subscriber since the days where they sent you DVDs in like a waxy orange envelope. Like I've been around from the beginning. I'm an early adopter. This was a long-term relationship, but we canceled Netflix a few weeks ago, and it's been really great for our family. I also started on the other side, kind of curating a to be read list of books and favorite scripture verses, songs, and podcasts, stuff like that, that point me to the good news of God's kingdom and what it looks like for me to practice living and loving like Jesus. And then the biggest thing for me is like just not filling in all the space of the things that I took out. Like I have to leave space in my life for solitude and silence with God. I have 2 young boys and I work and I have a lot of commitments. So like, it's not easy to find solitude or silence. I'm sure you guys know what that's like. Sometimes it's as simple as taking the long way home after I drop them off at school so that I can have a little extra time with the radio off to remember, God, you are with me now. You're with me in this day. I want you to be the one that leads the way, not my anxiety. And so like I don't want this is my like Brian, don't hear what I'm not saying moment, right? I'm not trying to tell you that news or the Netflix, they're not bad in and of themselves. You don't have to go home and cancel your streaming services to like follow Jesus. That's not what I'm saying at all. But this is me practicing practice number 2. We say, I choose what I want more. And I realized I wanted less of the noise in my life so that I could have more space to be able to clearly hear God's direction and his comfort in my life. It's not a prescription for everyone. I'm not telling you what you have to do this week, but I'm telling you this is what's been working for me lately. This is how this good news is playing out in my life. So before we go today, I want to give you guys some space to actually reflect on what God may be saying to you, and see how he might be inviting you to respond uniquely. So we're going to do something together called a prayer of examine. I'm going to invite you to just get comfortable where you're at. Begin to take some deep breaths. I'm going to sit down. It may help to close your eyes so you can just kind of focus on what's in your own head and heart right now. And let's start by just like getting the crazy out of the way in the first place. I'm going to give you just a moment to talk to God about what in the world around or within you feels crazy right now. Just be honest with him about what you are struggling with. And now let the words in your head and heart just kind of still. Take a moment to just acknowledge that God is with you right now. That he loves you, that he sees the things that feel crazy around and within you right now. He cares more than you do about all of it. He offers to be the good shepherd that can bring you rest and replenishment and lead you out of crazy. Just take a moment and sit in that and allow yourself to be with God. Now take a moment to just ask God what he wants you to see or do or choose. Is he inviting you to experience more rest and replenishment with him? Are there some paths he's trying to guide you on and you've been too caught up in the hectic around you to hear and see that? Take a moment to just ask God what the next right thing is from here that he wants for you. Father, thank you that you are the good shepherd. Thank you that even when I feel like the unruly sheep in the flock, the one who's lost and has to keep being found and brought back to rest and replenishment, you see and you care. You're the kind of shepherd that goes after the one and leaves the 99. God, I pray that you would help us to remember that you're always with us. And because of your presence, because of your provision, we lack nothing. We have nothing to fear. We can allow you to shepherd us out of what feels like insanity around and within us sometimes. I pray that you'd help us to find the pockets in our everyday rhythms, to notice your presence, and to allow you to refresh and restore us, and then allow you to guide us on the right paths from there. I pray that this week we would take baby steps toward learning from you how to live and love the way you do, in a way that calms the crazy and allows us to embody your peace and joy and wholeness for the world around us. Thank you. In your name, amen. Guys, before we just move on, I want you to take a moment to notice how you feel right now relative to how you may have felt when you came in today. Are you breathing a little deeper? Are you feeling less anxious or scattered? If that was just a couple of minutes of us practicing letting Jesus shepherd our souls toward more sanity. And that kind of peace and guidance, that's not the stuff that's only available when we come to church and we experience a moment together. God is with you all the time. And that invitation to shepherd you toward more sanity, to give you rest and replenishment, and to guide you on the right paths, that is an all the time invitation. It's always available. Our job is to stop and notice and keep choosing what we want more. Keep saying yes to it. And then when he shows us something, to follow that and to repeat that over and over again. My prayer this week, our prayer for you guys, is that you notice the ways that the Good Shepherd is with you and inviting you to learn from him, that you experience more peace and less anxiety, even when the world around you feels crazy, and that you're able to extend that to other people this week. Thank you guys so much for being here today. If you could use a little extra prayer today, we have a couple of people who are going to come up and hang out by the sides of the stage. I think Rachel and Reagan are coming today. These ladies would love to pray with you. If there's something that just feels extra hard going on and you could use somebody to embody that peace and love in your life right now, they would love to do that for you. So see them after the gathering. And don't forget, if you're new around here, Scott really, really wants to give away one of those campfire mugs and some hot chocolate. He was so excited. So go back there and see Scott after the gathering. We'll see you guys back here next week. Thanks so much.